What's up, you guys? It's Kirsten, and today we are diving into something that's absolutely destroying good men in modern relationships. Here's what I'm seeing. You disagree with your partner, and suddenly she's telling you that you're gaslighting her, or you let her know that you need space, and now you're always an avoidant or emotionally unavailable man. Or you want sex and suddenly you're a sex addict. Or, God forbid, you share a sexual fantasy and now she sees you as a perv. Meanwhile, you're walking on eggshells at home. You're questioning your every move and wondering when being a human being became a mental health diagnosis. Your confidence might be shot. Maybe your desires feel dangerous, or you're exhausted from feeling like you're constantly failing. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. Before we dive in, please take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. Trust me, your relationship will thank you for it. Today, I am joined by Dr. Isabelle Mortley. She is a clinical psychologist and a couples therapist who literally wrote the book, They're Not Gaslighting You. She's worked with hundreds of men and couples just like you. And today we are getting real about how this therapy language and labeling is being twisted to shut down conflict, to avoid accountability, and really to turn your natural masculine nature and needs into a pathology. So if you're tired of being labeled, or maybe you're tired of hearing the people that you date label other people, and you want to really reclaim your sense of power, this episode is for you. You guys, let's get some. Dr. Isabelle Mortley, welcome to The Naked Connection. Happy to have you here today.
I am so happy to be here today and to talk to you about this topic.
I want to open up with something that I think might connect with a lot of men. You know, as a couples therapist and a clinical psychologist, I know you work with couples all of the time. And I'm wondering, like, when a couple comes into your office, like, what is some of the most common things that the male partner will say or bring up or is struggling with?
I see a lot that men are struggling to understand what emotional intimacy means to women, how to meet them in that space, in part because they have been raised by certain masculine norms where they shouldn't be in touch with their feelings and making space for it in the same way that women are raised to be in touch with that part of themselves. And that there is not necessarily a lack of interest in providing this connection to their partners, but a
Mhm.
lack of ability, a lack of knowledge in that space. And their lack of knowledge can be read as disinterest, withdrawal, narcissism, right? We could put a lot of words to it. But
Yeah.
I see men who like desperately want to be there, to be connected, to communicate, and they are not totally sure how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know we're gonna dive into like a lot of these labels that can get placed on a man, whether it's like in the therapeutic space or not. So, I think that especially in today's with social media and like everyone like learning more about therapy, like there's a lot of beauty in that. And there's also kind of like the dark side of that. And I think, everything kind of gets labeled now. You disagree with someone and it's gaslighting, or like you need space and you're an avoidant attachment who's never going to be with anybody, or it's like you want sex or you're like a sex addict. So I'm wondering, like, from your experience and all of your research, like how did basic relationship needs or struggles like turn into this pathology, or like just where did being a human being become like a mental health red flag?
What a good way of putting it. Because human beings, I think, are just mental health red flags in general. The human experience is an absolute mess. We have so many feelings, we make so many mistakes.
Mhm.
And I think social media has really increased access to awareness and knowledge about mental health and psychological disorders in a way that's helped everybody and hurt everybody, and that they now can view people through this lens of pathology. And
Mhm.
I think it makes it hard to remember that the normal range of human experience involves a lot of messing up and a lot of error and flaw. But
Yeah.
we would rather be able to label it and understand it and fix it instead of accept it.
And you mentioned that when couples come in, a lot of men are just really wanting to figure out how to connect with their partner and like how to have better intimacy and kind of grappling with where to go in all of that. And I'm wondering from your experience, like what is like one of the things that even like holds them back in the first place?
Men tend to be fixers, and not across the board. But I think that is always the first barrier is that men see someone in distress and they want to help. They want to take away that negative feeling, that bad experience, instead of just sitting with that person in their feelings and whatever they are. And I think that immediately gets the conversation and the connection off track.
Mm. Yeah, from my experience of working with men as well, that is like just a common thread. And I think like there's so much beauty in that. And it's hard because that is innately just like kind of like how men are. And it's really powerful to have like if that didn't exist, so many problems would never get solved. And at the same time, it seems like it can, on the flip side of that, be problematic in terms of like connecting with a woman or supporting in a romantic relationship. So and kind of like thinking about this like therapy talk, I know a lot of like those terms of like toxic masculinity and things like that can kind of like drop into the picture in this like fixing solution oriented mindset. So where does a man go if he's like, my natural instinct is like, I want to fix this problem because I don't want to see my girlfriend or my partner in pain, but like it's not working.
Mm.
Like where do they go if from in there? Yeah.
The first thing that I would have them do is to say that exact sentence to their partner. Like, all I want to do is fix this for you because I hate seeing you upset about this. And I know that if I jump and do that, it will actually not make you feel better and it won't help us feel close. And just by saying that, they're being vulnerable. They're acknowledging this instinct and how they want to, but they're not going to because they're trying to create space to meet their partner's needs in the way that she needs.
Mm,
And that is a very powerful first step.
hmm. Yeah. Can be hard to do.
It's so hard to do. And I have a fixer instinct. You never want to see the person you love in distress, and the idea of doing nothing feels very counterintuitive.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, so it's almost like could you trick your mind into thinking by my solution to fix this problem is to actually not fix it.
Yes, to not fix it at all and to just, I mean, I'm sure people have heard this, validate the person's feelings. That sounds so hard. That must be really painful. I can imagine feeling the same way if I was in that situation, even if it's about them. And
Mm,
that's always hard because men usually want to explain why they did something or why they didn't do something, right? It's usually not malicious. And they want to, what we experience as defensiveness, this explanation. It's so hard to set that aside and not do that as the first thing.
I'm curious a bit about some of these labels that maybe that might come up, whether it's like in an experience like what we're just talking about, or otherwise. And the first one is this like narcissistic label of like people saying that you're a narcissist or what have you. And, I'm just wondering like how many men have heard their partner refer to like every ex as a narcissist or as like toxic. And I'm just can't help but wonder like at what point does this actually become a red flag about her worldview or her history? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, statistically speaking, it's just not likely
Yeah.
that somebody has only been with narcissists and toxic sociopaths and people who are pathological to that degree. So, if
Mhm.
that is the way a person is explaining all of their failed relationships, I think that is an indicator that they are missing some insight
Mm.
or, at the very least, missing some growth. Because if you continue to engage with narcissists, with clinical narcissists, then that is partly a you issue. You need to figure out what you're doing
Mhm.
to welcome those people into your life so readily. But yes, men are being accused of narcissism left, right, and center. Women too, but more borderline
Yeah.
than narcissism. And it's a very hard thing to counteract.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I know just from studying in grad school, like that statistically speaking, I think it's like 5% or less of the population is actually clinically di has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And so, yeah, to your point, like the chances of that happening are pretty slim. Um, and I don't, yeah, it's just like such an interesting phenomenon. And I feel for the men who have been like inaccurately labeled that and just wondering, what can someone do if that is like maybe what their partner is saying, that they're like they get into an argument and they're called that, or they're hearing their partner saying these things to them. What can they do?
This is the hardest thing, but the best thing you can do is, in a way, consider it because an immediate defensive response of, no, you're crazy, can be read as narcissism. And that's the danger of misusing these terms is that if you respond in contradiction to what you've been labeled, it can be further evidence that you are that thing or you're doing that thing. So, what people need to do is say, okay, whoa, it's a very big accusation. If you think that's true, like we need to talk about it in a serious way and talk about what that means for us or for me. And if it's not true, right, which maybe it's not, we have to think about how we're handling these conversations in a way that's more productive because
Mhm.
using this word is an immediate block in actually communicating and getting close.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like in arguments, like name calling is just like a really like problematic and not helpful. And it almost sounds like using some of these clinical terms is actually kind of like a loophole of name
Yes.
calling.
Yes, it is. And because it's a scientific word, people feel like it's okay or they feel like they're experts in it, but it is essentially name calling, especially when you use things like sociopath, which I don't know if anyone has accurately used in an argument with their partner.
And I think too, for someone that's listening, that like we all can exude tendencies of someone that might classify as like this diagnosis, right? Like we all have an element of ourselves that can be a little self-absorbed. We all have an element of ourselves that maybe doesn't show empathy in every moment of the day, and just acknowledging that that happens, but that doesn't necessarily mean that ourselves or our partners fall under this like really kind of extreme label and that can be harmful.
Yeah, all of these disorders are extremes of normal human experience and behavior.
Mhm.
To your point, we all have episodes of jealousy or feeling entitled to more admiration than we're getting, or whatever the criteria we could pick for narcissism or another disorder. Doesn't mean that we actually meet the criteria for the disorder itself.
Mhm.
And I think that's the problem with these words is that they're so relatable. I can see myself in every disorder. I could see somebody else in every disorder. But I'll point out that usually a key to responding is empathy and validation, because a lot of these
Mhm.
misused, weaponized words have to do with a lack of empathy, with abuse, with manipulation. And then there's things with, mood dysregulation. But truly, the best thing you can do is show empathy for the other person, even though they have accused you of something that feels unfair, untrue, weaponized,
Mhm.
because that is evidence that you are not that thing. If you can care about their pain, even as they said, you are such a narcissist, you never show up on time, you're showing that you're not a narcissist.
Yeah, and I wonder, just as we're starting to talk about this, I think in the dating space, a lot of, people that I speak with will use some of this, it seems like almost as like a layer to protect themselves. Like I'm thinking, let's say that someone is out dating and they're like, God, like every woman that I go out with is just batshit crazy. Or every, for on the flip side for women, they're like, yeah, every guy I go out with is just like so toxic and like just I only date love bombers and then they leave me like whatever. So they becomes like this way to protect themselves from ever actually going into a relationship further. And I'm curious of what you think of that.
These terms are absolutely self protective. in part because they allow you to put all of the blame on the other person.
Hmm.
If you always go out with love bombers who are kind to you and then leave you, and it's all their fault, you don't have to think about what am I doing to
Yeah.
elicit this attention and then lose it over and over and over again. Like, am I engaging in a way that's pushing people away?
Hmm.
That's hard to do, that painful self-inspection.
Hmm.
We don't want to do. And if we have a way out of it, we will take the way out of it. And these words give us the fastest, easiest way out.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I'm just thinking, let's say that someone's, whether you're that person yourself, or maybe you have a friend and you're like, every time I talk to them, this is what they say about their dating history, or this is how they talk about the dating world. What would you advise them to do?
Well, as you know, therapists are trained to meet people where they're at.
Hmm.
I would start by saying, okay, if this is what you think is going on for you, that everyone you date is a narcissist, that everybody is this toxic, that everybody has these red flags, what does that mean for you? How are you going to work through this to
Hmm.
get past this issue? Because, and I think you could lean into like, this sounds terrible. You can't find anybody who's healthy and normal. Like something is wrong here if that's the case.
Hmm.
What do you think you need to do about it? Because at the end of the day, these words are not supposed to be a way to avoid responsibility. They're supposed to empower people to figure out how they can take positive action to improve their lives and their relationships.
Hmm.
So you can even just agree with your friend and say, God, if that's going on, what are you going to do about it?
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Okay, let's talk about red flags. You just mentioned that. And, it seems like everything's a red flag nowadays. It's like the guy doesn't text back fast enough, it's a red flag. Like he enjoys time alone, it's a red flag. If he has like a close relationship with his mom, it's a red flag. Like for men that are trying to be like really solid partners, it seems like it's hard like where that line is anymore. So, what do you say to men who feel like perhaps like normal behavior is being turned into warning signs?
You're not going to be everybody's cup of tea.
Mm,
And unfortunately, things about you, your preferences, your behaviors may not be acceptable to another person that you're dating or are with. And if they choose to call it a red flag, there is just nothing you can do about it.
yeah.
I reserve red flags for actual like warning signs of abuse or a dangerous partner who is going to cause true damage to you, as
Mm,
opposed to, I just didn't like that thing about them. It's not what I'm looking for.
mm,
So I would say just remember that there'll be somebody else who thinks it's great. You have a close relationship with your mother. There'll be another person who loves that you're an introvert and you stay home. And sort of like with the idea of don't yuck somebody else's yum, a lot of these things are personal preferences and they're not necessarily warning signs of abuse.
That's a really good way to distinguish between like what's just something that I don't like about this person versus like truly what's something that indicates abuse. Yeah.
And
Uh,
unfortunately, we just need more data. I think people are, yeah, picking one piece of information. He waited 3 days to write back. What a red flag. He's avoidant, he's a player, whatever that is, and
uh-huh.
not getting a bigger picture of that person. Maybe he was on a trip and didn't have access to his phone, which I know doesn't really happen nowadays. But like there's always circumstances that could explain. You just need more data on people before you come to these really strong conclusions about who they are at their psychological core.
Yeah, or it's like maybe they just don't like you that much and they forgot to text you back.
Yes. And like, and that sucks to say, and it's painful to hear if you're that person, but
Mhm.
sometimes somebody's just not going to like you for whatever reason, and they're not going to treat you very well, not because they're a pathologically bad person, but because people do that to each other, and because we're living in a time where there's no more rules, there's no more script on how to date and how to end dating. So everyone's kind of muddling their way through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 We were kind of talking a little bit about dating, but I'm wondering if we look a little bit at this topic of gaslighting, because this to me seems like such a heavily used term that I think people don't even understand what it means actually, or like what it really looks like. So, can you break down like what actually is gaslighting and how can someone know that their partner might be doing it?
Gaslighting is an abuse tactic where somebody systematically, insidiously, over time makes you doubt your sense of reality and lose self trust in your experience. And
Mm,
they can do this by repeatedly lying to you about things that have happened that you know have happened, or about making you feel like you're crazy for your experience or for your feelings. They're always out of control and out of disproportionate to the event. And it's very different from the normal disagreements and memory differences that people have in a relationship. And I always say, like, people fight about what did or didn't happen all the time.
yeah.
You said you would pick up the dry cleaning. No, I didn't. I said, da, 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 da. That's not what happened. That's not, you're not gaslighting each other. You're disagreeing about what was said and not said. But that's not the same as abuse. And I think people are jumping to this word gaslighting when they feel invalidated, like someone doesn't automatically agree or see their perspective. But that really minimizes the actual term.
Mm. Okay, and so you said something interesting where it's like intentional. Is that so it's like someone is going into, say, an argument and they know what really happened, but they're like, I'm gonna stick to this story and I'm gonna tell you that it was something else. Is that what you mean by that?
Sometimes people are
Hmm.
very intentionally doing it. Sometimes, maybe a lot of the times, it's not intentional. People
Mm,
who tend to gaslight, who tend to engage in other abusive behaviors too, really believe that they're right and
mm,
that their partner is fully wrong, and they are seeking to gain power and control in all these various ways. So they may not even realize they're doing it. They
mm,
just so wholeheartedly can't imagine that they're not right that they have to make their partner wrong.
mm. Okay. And from your experience, I'm wondering, like, I think when we hear abusive relationships, we often think that it's like a man abusing a woman. And I would imagine, statistically speaking, perhaps that is probably more prevalent. But I'm wondering, like, how does it show up like, how does an abusive relationship typically look if it's like a woman that's an abuser?
It looks the same. Yeah, statistically speaking, it is more often men who are the abusers. However, women can be abusive. And what I see most often is more emotional abuse and
Mm,
verbal abuse, whether that's name calling or criticizing or demeaning or swearing. And it can be more subtle and it can be explained away more easily because we tend to picture abuse only going in the male to female direction, which is obviously not always the case.
hmm hmm Yeah, I was just curious because when you brought like through talking about gaslighting, I'm like, I could see a woman, a woman really skillfully doing that.
Yes, especially because women tend to be more hooked into the therapy world, to getting their own therapy, into reading the self-help books, and
Yeah.
they may have a lot more of the language and awareness. And again, maybe not intentionally
Hmm.
manipulative or abusive, but because they've adopted this view that feels so right to them, they can't see their way through it.
Yeah, it seems like it's like not always like black and white in terms of digging through this. And like for someone who is noticing, wow, what you just described, I feel like my partner does that to me all the time. And I don't really know if I'm constantly questioning my reality, or they're just noticing maybe that like emotionally, like they're kind of being dragged in a way that doesn't feel healthy. What, where could a guy like start to even just look at things? Like how does what's the first step there?
I think the awareness and recognizing when it happens, and maybe journaling to
Mm,
sort of track how often is this happening? What are the things that you're noticing, and are there patterns that you're seeing?
mhm,
And then the best way to break abuse is to talk to other people about it, is to have a therapist aware of what's going on and weighing in on what is happening or not happening and helping you try to work through it. And if you can't, that
Yeah.
could be an indication it's abusive. Having friends know what's going on, because abuse shrinks your world,
Mm.
shrinks your life, cuts off relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, and understanding kind of the relationship dynamic that men often have, like they're not most guys aren't going to their other guy friends being like, "Hey,
Yeah.
my wife keeps doing this. Is this normal?" Like that's just not the typical MO. So, I'm wondering, understanding that, how could they, or where is a good outlet for them?
There's a lot of great books that men can read, and you're right,
Mm.
there's not the same social support. If they have female friends, that could be a
Mhm.
good place to go. Female friends are great for that kind of sounding board conversation. And I would recommend, to be quite truthful, that men see male therapists who I think would be able to pick up on what's happening really effectively and communicate what's going on.
Mm.
To be quite frank, I have seen a lot of female therapists convince male clients that I see in couples work that there's abuse occurring when it is not happening.
Mm.
So there's definitely a tricky line to walk when you are trying to gauge this what's normal, what's not normal. And so that's why I would say, I mean, I'm biased here, but couples therapy, having somebody in the room with both you and your partner is the best way to know.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's interesting having done work one-on-one with people and then bringing those people into the room together. You're like, whoa, or just seeing the interaction. There's so much that is shared that isn't always evident when it's just one individual. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm like, let's step into sex. Like
Let's
total
talk
left
about
turn
it.
here. I'm thinking, let's say that a guy, he comes home from a long day. Maybe he sees that his wife is like a little bit stressed and he wants to connect with her, like emotionally and physically. And like her reaction is like, you're being manipulative, or like you only want sex, or you're, even worse, like, it's like you're a sex addict. That's all that you want, like nothing else. Like, what's wrong with you? What does a
Oh.
man like? What? Because I think that that's something that can come up quite often where a guy is like, babe, I just want to like be with you and I want to connect with you and I want to like enjoy pleasure with you. And that is what is thrown at them, whether it's like the definition of a sex addict or just like that's all that you want or something like that. I think that that can be really detrimental to everybody involved. So for anyone that's like having that experience, what would you say to them?
I would start by saying it is so hard to be in that position. Some
Hmm.
people have higher sex drives or they feel connected through sex in a way their partner doesn't. And that is really difficult because it is easy to then be painted as somebody who's a sex addict who is just looking for a physical release, who doesn't care about the other person emotionally, even though that's not the case.
Mm.
And so I would just start by saying, you're probably not a sex addict. It is normal to want to have sex with the person that you love and to feel connected in that way, even if your partner doesn't feel the same way about it and is viewing it negatively.
Mm.
The thing to do is not to ignore that issue or to stop asking entirely and acquiesce to whatever it is that they feel comfortable with, but to talk about that issue of like, maybe I am seeking this and I feel connected in this way more than you do. How can we approach this together? How can I ask you in a way that doesn't make you feel like I'm just after your body, right? Or like, what are the ways in which we can communicate about this so that we can both get our needs met? Because it is okay to want sex in your relationship.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I imagine that like when this is happening for a man over and over again, that there's like a sense of confidence that got gets lost, or kind of like you're mentioning, like there's a you don't really like want to initiate anymore. It's like why even it starts to become like why even go there if like that's how it's going to be received. And I know I've had a lot of like deep dive conversations on the topic of like when like sex is like kind of falling to the wayside in your relationship and things like that. But just think like looking at if someone is throwing out a label like that, how to like what that does to someone.
I think it usually instills a lot of shame. You
Mhm.
know, what you're asking for isn't normal. You're a bad person for approaching me in this way or for wanting this from me and not considering what I want in return, right? There's something wrong with you that you want sex this much or you would ask me in this way. That makes people feel terrible about themselves. That's why these labels get so destructive, is because really the thing to do is say, I totally understand that you want to connect in that way.
Mhm.
The way you're approaching me about it isn't working for me, or
Mhm.
the sex that we're having isn't working for me. And I want to make that better so that we are enjoying it together more,
Mhm.
which is so not shaming. And the way of saying, you're such a sex addict, this is all you want, is shaming.
Mhm. Yeah. And that even makes me think about maybe it's not like even just the initiation of sex in general, but like the type of sex and like fetishes that might be presented and how, sometimes like people don't receive that well. And you shared like not yucking someone's yum. And I think that unfortunately in sex, that can be an often just knee-jerk reaction that someone says. Like someone's like, oh, I have like a voyeuristic fetish, or, I want to do BDSM. And someone's like, absolutely not. Like, you're unwell, gross, or what,
Yes. Yes.
whatever
Yeah.
that might be. And so
Yeah.
that is something that I think really is really detrimental.
Yeah. I mean, right. Saying such a pervert. Why would you want to hurt someone? What's wrong with you? Right. Which is really, they're uncomfortable with those fetishes and kinks, which is fine. They don't have to want to do them. It's totally okay to set a boundary for yourself and say, I don't want to do that. Fine if you do, but I don't want to be a part of it.
Mhm.
But there is just more and more language that involves labeling and shaming and making the other person a pathological problem, as
Mhm.
opposed to somebody who has different preferences, different needs, and that being okay, even if it's not what you want.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I know it could even go the other way around where maybe like, oh, a female partner is presenting to a guy that's listening her desire and he's like, absolutely not. Like, and I think that we've been talking about some of the labels that can be placed on men, traditionally speaking, like what we kind of walk through, I think is a little bit of that. If a man's listening to this and he's like, I don't really connect with this, but like I definitely think that like my girlfriend is like borderline, that girl's got some emotional issues. I don't know if I can deal with it any longer. Like when we look at the flip side of this, what comes up for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that a lot. Borderline, bipolar, OCD.
Mm,
Women fall more into the emotion dysregulation category as opposed to the sort of like abuse, power, manipulative control category. Um, I always start by saying, you don't have to be with this person, whether or not they have borderline. If it's too much for you and you don't want to do this work, then you don't have to. You don't
mm,
have to figure out the disorder if there is one. But if you like this person and care about them and want to figure out how to be with them,
mm,
then you have to be more mindful of your approach. Like if you love your wife and you think she might have OCD or she might have borderline, then you need to approach that conversation with her with a lot of compassion and gentleness and care, knowing it might be a conversation you have a few times before your concerns are fully heard and
mhm.
start to be addressed, instead of jumping to an angry, accusatory label in the middle of an argument.
Yeah. 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 And I think that, you know, a lot of these labels are being like thrown around inaccurately. And what if they're not? What it like where does someone go in that moment when they're like, I actually like pulled up Chat GPT now. And this is like feeling really accurate. And I'm worried for myself, or I'm worried for my partner that this is something that's like really going on for them. And I don't know what to do.
This is the positive flip side of social media promoting information about these terms, because I think people are able to also accurately identify when they're going on in a relationship too. The first thing is to educate yourself
Mhm.
about whatever it is and to figure out what you want to do about it.
Mm,
And that might mean that you want to leave. If it's a relationship that is, it's new or not working or bad for you, it might be that you realize somebody has a disorder and you can't be with them, can't work with them on it. And that's okay. Um, just because somebody has a mental health issue doesn't mean you have to stay with them and help them through it.
mhm,
And if you want to stay with them, you are going to have to help them get help
mhm,
and set boundaries and take care of yourself and not take on their mental health journey all on your own, which
mm,
can happen in relationships.
yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I've learned, especially about personality disorders that we've kind of been speaking to of like the narcissistic, borderline, antisocial, that oftentimes, not a hard requirement, but oftentimes they're the result of having like a pretty traumatic or challenged childhood. And this is just kind of like the personality that they have taken on in order to survive. It was like
Mhm.
how they kind of moved through that is what some of my professors have shared. And so understanding that, I think, at least for me, was very helpful to see, oh, wow, this is like coming from something really painful. And this is how they've come to cope with it. And to your point, yeah, of making that decision, is this something that I am like okay with being here for?
Which can be such a painful call to make, especially if you know somebody's traumatic history and you've seen the ways in which they have been hurt and they have survived.
Mhm.
You may feel a lot of love and empathy for them and want to help take care of them. And
Yeah.
it may not be the right thing for you to do because they are destructive in ways they can't control, or they're unwilling to get help and do the work to address their behaviors or their emotional dysregulation. And so, just because you can understand where a disorder comes from and have empathy for that doesn't mean that you have to stay with the person and work through it.
Beautiful. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be important to touch on as we close here?
I think men in particular can be advocates for changing this language. I
Mm,
think that they, in their male relationships or in their romantic relationships, can be the ones to say, let's not use that word unless we really mean it.
mm.
I think that goes a very long way, and they can be real advocates for shifting into authenticity and vulnerability instead of using these protective words. So, should they want to, I think it would be wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.